What about unjust wars? Where's the teaching on unjust wars? Obviously, if a war is not just, then it's unjust, right? So what about teaching on those? Do you notice there's no teaching on this? Do you see what I'm showing you here? That we are not getting teaching on Jesus's enemy love. We have to love our enemies. Even though they say that Jesus's words are the most important thing, they usually try to say, well, that's just hyperbole, and he doesn't really mean that. Then they endorse wars and say, well, they're just, but then never consider whether the criteria were met. Do you want to know the real reason why preachers don't teach on just war? The real reason why preachers don't teach on just war from their pulpit is because if they told you the criteria of what just war is, you would realize how high the standard is. And then you would suddenly realize that the wars that we engage in don't reach those criteria. It's safer for you not to know the criteria so that then you imagine that the wars that America fights or any other country fights are just. It protects your conscience to help you remember that we're the good guys and everybody else is the bad guy, and just war. I mean, literally, when you debate on this topic, if you say, well, can Christians kill in war? They'll say, well, Hitler, and they'll say just war. These don't mean anything. They're meaningless. They're completely meaningless. To bring up Hitler or to bring up just war, that's meaningless. We have to look at the actual war and say, did this meet the criteria of the just war tradition? Did it meet the criteria? And if it doesn't, and then you excuse it anyway, well, then the just war tradition has no integrity. I mean, it's just literally a shell game. It's a theological shell game that allows us to salve our consciences. Remember who is outside of the New Jerusalem. When you get to Revelation 22, verses 14 and 15, it says that who's outside of the gates of the New Jerusalem? Lots of people, including murderers. And if you fight a war that is unjust according to the just war tradition, then the whole church says that that's murder. I mean, that's the whole point of having a just war tradition in the church. Now, another reason why all of this is complicated is because of the fact of the old teaching by Aeschylus. In war, truth is the first casualty. So if truth is the first casualty of war, then the just war theory is fatally flawed because it's morally impossible to apply. If we don't know what the truth is as soon as the bullets start to fly, then how are we going to possibly know whether the intention is right, whether there's proportionality, whether the just cause is proper? We know that in war, truth is the first casualty. Everybody nods their head up and down and says, yep, that's true. Okay, well then how can you apply a just war standard then? Because you can't know the truth at that point. Remember, Colossians, in the book of Colossians 2, verse 8, Paul writes, beware lest anyone cheat you. I want you to listen to that word, cheat. I would suggest to you that the just war is a philosophy that seeks to cheat Christians. Listen to what it says. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy, according to the tradition of men. Have we not demonstrated that the just war theory and the tradition is a tradition of men? Have we not demonstrated that this morning? Have we not shown that it is a philosophy that crept into the church? Have we not demonstrated that? Have we demonstrated that it's not according to Christ? That Christ nowhere in the New Testament talks about just war or explains when you can kill people and when it's appropriate to kill and when it's appropriate not to kill? Can we all admit this, that this tradition, that this theory is not rooted according to Christ, not in Christ, but it's a tradition of men, and that it's a philosophy? Now notice what Paul is saying. Beware lest anyone cheat you through this philosophy. How would we be cheated? Well, we would be cheated because Peter tells us that we're called to follow Jesus in his suffering. He left a model for us so it would be a blessing to us. So when we follow and keep Jesus' commands, we are sons of the kingdom. We are like him. We are like God when we copy Jesus, when we model our behavior after Jesus. according to Christ. But that when we instead just act like Christ didn't even exist and then subscribe to some philosophy that's thousands of years old, and even though it doesn't even mention Jesus and doesn't require Jesus, if we somehow believe that we can just hitch our wagon to that and ignore what Jesus says on the topic of this, of killing, then we need to beware, because we are going to be cheated. And that's what I would suggest that has happened to the church, is that for the last 1,700 years, we have been cheated. Jesus did not commission his church to go and teach philosophy. Jesus commissioned his church to go and teach what he said to do. He didn't tell his disciples, hey, go find some good pagan philosophies that sound good and go teach those. That's not what he said. He said, well, we'll read it in a minute, but he says, go teach all men to obey the things that I commanded you, right? That's what we're supposed to teach. The teachings of Jesus are entirely ignored by just war theory. Jesus might as well have never existed when you consider just war theory. Do Christians have the moral right to alter the teachings of God as revealed through Jesus because of some pagan tradition? Do Christians have the moral right to alter the teachings of God as revealed through Jesus? No, we don't have the moral right to alter any of the teachings. So we can't say that you can go kill your enemies when Jesus says that you can't, right? When Jesus says you have to love them, and then he literally demonstrates through his life and models it for us, what we're supposed to do with those who hate us and despise us. Can we in good conscience do what Jesus refused to do and taught his followers to refuse to do? Those who promote homicidal violence as acceptable behavior by Christians or for Christians believe that one can follow Jesus without following his teachings. It's just that simple. Those who promote homicidal violence as acceptable behavior for Christians believe that one can follow Jesus without following his teachings. I mean, that's completely absurd. If Jesus was nonviolent, then to follow him means to live a life of nonviolence. As Christians, we're not allowed to hate our enemies. We saw this not only in the writings of the Gospels, but also in the writings of the epistles, and then we saw it in the early church before Constantine saw a cross and said, "Go conquer in this sign." And then Augustine says, "I like Cicero. Let's consider a just war theory now that we're in power." We're not allowed to hate our enemies, let alone take their lives. Therefore, homicidal violence is not an option for us. It wasn't an option for Jesus. It wasn't an option for the apostles. It wasn't an option for the early church. How it's an option for us, I have no clue.